Okay, welcome back to the Are You Strong show. I have an awesome guest on the show today, and unfortunately, this young woman got away from the University of Maine, from a basketball story. We had a little chat about that, and it's a loss on the Maine side. But this young woman has a tremendous story, to talk about today. Um, Gorham, Maine, went to high school at Gorham, Maine, basketball
hmm
star. Decided to go to Villanova to play basketball, continue her career. It doesn't get much bigger than that in the college basketball world. Um, and then during her career, she transferred to get a little bit closer to home, but not all the way home, to Boston University, where she graduated in 2022. Um, like most athletes, all of us, we face some different challenges, some mental challenges along the way. But these challenges inspired this young woman to start her own business at a very young age. And the name of her company is Empowered or Empowerment.
hmm
And when you hear her name, you're going to see where the name of the company came from. But her company, was she coaches and trains individuals as well as groups on basketball and mental toughness. And she coined a quote, which I think is so cool. It's, "We are not our sports. We are our stories,"
hmm
which is really amazing. Welcome to the show, Emily Esposito.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
It- It's
Yeah.
it's it's a pleasure, and I'm really disappointed though that my school wasn't able to rope you in, and have you go up there and play basketball. But you know what? If you went there, you might not be who you are today.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know,
I think that's
so
always hindsight.
I have a lot of questions to ask you. So before I start getting into that, why don't you just tell the audience just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So, as Jeff said, my name's Emily Esposito. I grew up in Gorham, Maine. And I always start this when people ask about me is I have two older brothers. I think that gives a lot of context to who I am. My oldest brother is 8 years older than me. So everything in my life was trying to keep up with the two of them. And then my mom was an ICU nurse, still is, and my dad is a carpenter. Again, I think that's where I get some of my character from and a lot of what has shaped me. But yeah, sports were really my whole childhood. It's what we did, it's how my brothers and I bonded. It's what we did on Sunday afternoons, driveway basketball and have tournaments. And then from there, it kind of took off into AAU in the sports world and into high school. I played basketball and soccer, and I stopped softball when I was in middle school. But again, those were all things that gave me confidence. So I stuck with those. And then, as Jeff said, I got recruited and ended up going to Villanova. Was there for 2 years and ended up transferring. But I mean, that's just a little bit of my background and kind of what makes me me and who makes me me. So, yeah.
Good. Well, I have a lot of questions, and I'm going to bounce around a little bit if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's
I'm going to
fine.
talk about, going all the way back to high school. We're going to get into college. We're going to get into after college. We're going to get into your business. There's so many things to talk about. And but the first question I always ask the athletes who join the show is, when did you know you had the skill set and the ability to play at such a high level after high school? When did you realize, hey, I'm 8 years old, I'm eighth grade, or when did all, like, I can play at that big level?
I don't really know. I think it just from such a young age, I had so like I think that was my biggest thing is I had so much fun playing these sports. Like I would pretend I don't know who I thought I was, but my favorite part was like putting my arms around my teammates and I was just saying random stuff to get them hyped up and we're gonna beat this team and da 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 da. Like that was the camaraderie of like I
Yeah.
remember my youth soccer league, like the pictures we have of us with our arms around each other. That was the part that I loved. And I think I always embraced that. And I think where I knew I was a little bit different is I loved to hear like what my coaches had to say. I
Mhm.
really wanted the feedback. And I think that's because like to me that was my school. That's where I felt comfortable learning. And and I think it's what helped me develop as a person. Like I knew okay, academic wise, my brother is a genius and we always joke he's the brains of the family. But like for me to learn, it was always through movement or through sports. Like that's how I was going to get my life lessons. So as
Mm,
much as it's like we talk about skill wise, how do we know we were ready for the next level? I don't know if I knew that until maybe I was a freshman in high school.
okay.
And I got my first offer going into freshman year. And I remember it was from Maine, and my mom was like, "Wait, Emily, what do you mean are you sure they offered you a full scholarship?" I said, "Yeah, they said something about." I go, "Mom, what's tuition?" They said they'd pay tuition and then like I don't think I have to like pay for books or something. And she was like, "Yeah, Emily, that means you don't have to pay for anything." And I was like, "So, yeah, clearly I didn't understand the full depth of what that meant to get a full
Yeah.
scholarship." But yeah, you kind of like learn more about what it is and the recruiting process and all that type of stuff. But I think I just knew I was a little bit different in the aspect of like I loved the team aspect. And I know a lot of people say that, but like when I was a kid, that brought me so much joy.
But you're not alone. Every
Yeah.
athlete, especially once they grow to that college level,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the team becomes everything.
Yeah.
The team becomes your friends. The team becomes your family. The team
Mm-hmm.
becomes your go-to. You're around them all the time,
Yeah.
and doesn't mean you have to like them all. Doesn't mean you have to get along with them
Right.
all. But it becomes like your extended family.
Mm-hmm.
But ninth grade, you got an offer. Like, what the
Yeah.
heck is that like? In ninth grade, you're what, 14, 15? I don't even
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah.
you're getting
13,
a full
14.
full scholarship, you know. So what was that recruiting process like? I mean, imagine from ninth grade as you got progressing through high school, more and more offers came and more and more stress was put on top of that.
Yeah. I think, the recruiting process for me, one, I talk about it and it's already light years different from when I was in high school.
Yeah.
But like for me, I took it so seriously in the sense of even when I was in high school, I wanted to go to Macaulay, which was a private school, and they had just won four state championships. And I'm like, oh, mom, I want to go there. I want to win a state championship. And I remember my mom being like, that's awesome, Emily. But if you really want to win a state championship, you can just win one for home at Gorham.
Yeah.
And it was that my mom's from the Midwest in a small town. And so for her, loyalty is everything. So this idea of like, no, you can do this with your hometown friends. You can do this. Like, wouldn't that be cool to do it with your best friends that you've grown
Yeah.
up playing with since you were in third grade? And so that carried on in my head into the recruiting process. Like, I didn't go into it ever thinking transferring was an option.
Yeah.
And it seems so interesting because I did it 2 years in. But I really did. I wanted to pick what felt right. And it wasn't just basketball based. Like, it's so funny. My parents, every home visit I had, I don't think they asked any basketball questions. They just wanted to get like Harry at Villanova, the head coach. He was this Italian guy. So him and my grandpa are just shooting the breeze, chit chat. And I'm like, wait, Harry, are you recruiting my grandpa? Or are you
Yeah.
recruiting me? And like for some other coaches, my mom um, was like, oh, do you want to go on a moped ride or something? So I say all this
Yeah.
because it's like they just never pressed like, oh, how many minutes is she gonna get? Is she gonna be a
Yeah.
starter? It was very relaxed and they left it up to me, which I appreciate because I think I grew from that a lot. But it did allow a lot of stress to be placed on me because it's not like I had an older sibling who had been through this before.
Yeah.
So I could ask them questions. And more often than not, you go into these recruiting meetings um, and visits, and they're trying to sell you something.
Yeah.
And I think as a teenager, that's hard to decipher, right? If someone's telling you what you want to hear, you take it at face value
Right.
oftentimes. And I think that was the interesting thing about Harry is I always tell people is like I think the most profound thing he had said to me is well, first he was always a straight shooter. So I
Mhm.
remember one of the first times I went into his office, he was like, "All right, Emily, you're not very athletic, but you make up for it in other ways." And I'm like,
What does
I
that
can't
mean?
I can't tell if this is reverse psychology or what's happening here. And then later in that meeting, he said, I think you should look at DePaul. Like you'd fit their system really well. I know Coach Bruno, da 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 da. You should look at this school and that. And I'm like, okay, so do you not want me?" And it wasn't until I came back in later that day and he said, Emily, my biggest thing is I love to give kids the option because I want to see them have success and enjoy their career. So I want them to see everything that there is. And if I have a connection, then I will give you that connection. He goes, but that's my way of knowing if you commit to Villanova, then you're committing because you want to be here, not because I persuaded you to be here. And he
Mhm.
was one of the few coaches where I'm like, wow, that's incredible. And
Yeah.
he only, I mean, he was there for 42 years and only had, I think, 3 kids transfer. I could be wrong in that, but it was a very small number.
Yeah.
But I don't know, the recruiting process I think is drastically different. But for someone like me who's an overthinker, right, and wants to get something right, like there was no one who told me that there's no right place for you in terms of there's just a better fit. There's no
Yeah.
perfect place, I should say,
Right.
for you. And I think I was always looking for like something to check every single box and everything was going to work out well and
Perfect
everything.
fit.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
as my mom, she's like, Emily, any path you would have picked has inevitable hardships. It's just
Mm.
you pick this one and that's kind of what you have to go through and you can't go back and change it. And so I kind of mull that over, but my mom's very good about, being in the present and adjusting and appreciating what you've been through. So that's always something that has stuck with me. Not that I've gotten much better at it, but at least I'm aware of it now.
But it wasn't that long ago,
Yeah,
you know?
that's a
So,
good point too.
so how about this one? There's probably young girls and guys that are
Mhm.
listening to this right, maybe not right this second, but will be, and they're ninth grade, 10th grade, and they're like, I gotta make a decision. How the heck did she do it? How did she make this decision if her parents were kind of leaving it up to her? How the heck did you do it? Like, what was the
Yeah.
deciding factor if you say, I'm going there?
Yeah. I think I was very diligent in the sense that what I tried to tell kids to do now, or at least give them an option, I was like, I was very big on one, I wanted to be on campus and get the feel of the campus.
Hmm.
And the other thing is, I always kept a notebook and I wrote down when the date the coaches would call, which specific coach on the staff would call. Because one of the things you can do then is you jot down the key points, which is great because then when another coach calls, are they adding up? And
Mm.
that's more of like a protective thing. So even from the start, like, oh, and is this consistent with what they've been saying? You know what I mean? Are they
Wow.
tweaking? Where
How
am
many
I like in the recruiting process?
how many young kids ever think to do that? Who did somebody recommend that to you?
No, but I think it's just the overthinker in me. Like I was someone who I went in and Mrs. Nelson helped me. She's like, make a pros and cons list. And that was too generic for me because I was like, okay, I was like, I feel like everything can balance out. You can find just as many cons as you can find pros. I'm like, it's the red car theory, right? Like what you look for, you'll
Yeah.
find. And
Yeah.
so I was like, no, I have to do like the people who are talking to me and how I feel with the team. So everything, I always kept a notebook of the schools that called, and then you can tell how frequently they call. And what do they talk about? Do they just talk about basketball or are they really interested in you? And so you kind of can see the trajectory of those conversations and how they pan out. And then sometimes you just get a gut feeling of like, okay, maybe this isn't the spot for me, or
Yeah.
I don't really feel a connection with this coach. Um, or this coach just left and that was my only connection to that place. So I think that helped me a lot. But I will say it's tough. Like I know I've had friends whose parents are very involved in the recruiting process and almost like their agent, for lack of a
Yeah.
better term. And so sometimes even my mom will be like, "Should I have done more?" And I'm like, "No, mom, you were great because I'm pretty sure you're the reason I got some scholarship offers just because you were so fun, carefree, and
Yeah.
like you genuinely cared about these coaches as people. Like they didn't come up to our house and feel like they were trying to recruit a kid. I think they just felt like they were having a home cooked meal. And that's
Yeah.
all my mom wanted. So we play that balancing game, but I think for me it wasn't necessarily the basketball aspect. It was more the emotional connections. Like, am
Right.
I gonna feel like I'm taken care of? Am I gonna feel like I'm part of the family?
Yeah.
Um, and I think being on campus with Villanova and the redshirting process was went back and forth, went both ways. I'm like, oh, this is great. Like I'll have a year under my belt that I can just practice and get all this stuff down because Harry's offense was hard to learn for me personally. Um, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, but I don't get to play my first year. So I'm like, that's frustrating. So you kind of go back and forth and you
Yeah.
figure out what works. But at the end of the day, I think the main selling point was Harry being brutally honest. He wasn't going to sell me something that was fake.
Mm.
He was a man of his word. Um, it was just unfortunate circumstances happened after I committed, um, that changed kind of how the dynamic was and how things panned out. But that's life. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
can't plan for everything.
No. But I'll bet you that notebook you kept. Do you still have it?
I do not. I'm
No.
pretty sure I'm pretty sure well, one, my car got broken into and all the
Oh,
notebooks I had for my business and
oh my
everything
God.
were in there. And so ever since then, I've had a digital notebook. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was in that bag because I was looking through some of my notebooks a couple weeks ago because I was actually talking to a kid about this. And I'm like, okay, I want to just show you the format I had, really simple. And then I was going through it and I'm like, yeah, I don't think I have it anymore.
Is that notebook, one, it probably kept the coaches honest because
Yeah.
now you can double check. Hey, you said this last time. You're saying this
Yep.
time, right? Two, it probably kept you from keeping things confused. Was that coach? Did he say that? Did this
Right.
coach say that?
Right.
Did he say that? But then three, that notebook, you could have wrote a book with that
I know.
and used it to teach young kids about getting recruited.
Right. But I
Wow.
think that, yeah, the concept is very simple, right? But
Yeah.
simple isn't always easy in terms of being consistent with
Yeah.
writing that down, right? Because then you miss a call and it's like, wait, did this coach call me or
Yeah.
not? And how frequently? So I think I don't know, that was just something because I am an overthinker, I needed something concrete in front of me that was tangible, like, okay, I can look at this.
Yeah. Now, you've said it probably 15 times now that you're an overthinker.
Yeah.
What makes you think you're an overthinker? Did you come up with that by yourself? Did somebody tell you that? Like, how did you come up with that?
I think it's because that's a little bit how my dad is. He's a finished carpenter and I've worked with him before and I'm like, "Dad, what you just did, like he worked on the Bush's house in Kennebunk and I'm like, "Dad, they wouldn't have hired you if you weren't good. Like literally you measured this 14 times. I promise you it's the length you said it was." And so I think a little bit of it stems from there, but there I don't know what I think it's also more recently than anything because I feel like I said to my mom a couple weeks ago, I feel like the timing of my life is just off, is what I said to her. And in a way of like, I just feel like I can't, like, the good stuff that's happening. I'm like, wait, hold on, because something else is going to come. So I'm always overthinking the next step, which is so interesting
Hmm.
because my biggest philosophy lately has been the best thing you can do is make the right decision. The not most ideal thing you can do is make the wrong decision. But the worst thing you can do is make no decision.
Mm.
And I think sometimes that's where I get stuck is in that I'm trying to think of every, almost like a safety mechanism. I'm trying to think of every possible outcome to make sure, like, right? Because I felt like I made a mistake when I picked Villanova, but granted, circumstances changed. I transferred to BU. I felt like afterwards I made a mistake picking BU. And it's like, Emily, when are you going to make a right decision? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think it's become one of those things that I'm in the process of unlearning. And it's like, Emily, as long as you make a decision, you can go from there. And and good things will happen when you take action.
Tell me those three things again. The best thing you can do, because I'm writing this stuff down
Yeah.
when you're talking. The best thing you can do is make the right
Yep.
decision, right?
Yep.
What's the second one?
I always say the not most ideal thing you can do is make the wrong decision.
Right.
And then the worst thing you can do is make no decision.
Mm. Now, do you use that when you're coaching your kids?
Yeah, I tell it, it's funny. With conviction, I tell them that as if I do that well myself. And I always say, because I'm like, especially nowadays, kids are so afraid to make mistakes. And I say that again, like I'm not afraid to make mistakes, but in games, you can tell it's like they're so hesitant. They're, they don't want to make a mistake, but then all they're thinking about is making a mistake. So what happens? they usually make a mistake. So I said, guys, I just want, if anything, make a mistake aggressively. I can't, I cannot get mad at you for that because then not, at least not everyone else is in limbo. Like
Yeah.
if you make a decision, people now have a concrete thing to adjust to. But if you're sitting here going back and forth, they don't know what to do either. And so it's that whole kind of ripple effect that
Yeah.
takes place. I mean, you learn it over time, but for kids who are so scared to make a mistake, that's a hard concept to
Yeah.
understand.
Now, what do you think that comes from? You think it's coming from the parents, coming from the other coaches they've had where they're just, petrified to do the wrong thing?
I think it comes from a lot of things. I honestly think it comes from society as a whole, right? Like I was just talking to someone last night at a game. I said, it's so sad to see these kids, right? Like a lot of them haven't played backyard basketball. Everything has been so
So structured.
yeah, one of my old teammates and I, we talk about it all the time. We call them camp kids. Everything has to be played in this certain, they have to have the instruction on what to do. And okay, we're going to jump stop and we're going to pivot and we're going
Yeah.
to do this and we're going to do that. And we were like, we remember playing with teammates in college who we were playing pickup and they
Yeah.
started coming up with rules like you have to pass the ball so many times
Yeah.
and you can only dribble this many times and we're like okay you're just making that up because you can't break someone down one on one so you're catering the game to yourself and I think
Yeah.
sometimes that's what happens with these kids everything has been so structured that right when they don't do the perfect jump stop and pass they're like wait I just did that wrong now okay that's not what I was supposed to do but when you're playing backyard basketball you learn through every failure and heck sometimes
Mm.
what you consider a failure is a new move, right? Or it's like, wait, I just now I'm understanding, okay, when this person cuts me off, oh, I can easily do a between cross and now I know how their body shifts or I have a pocket pass out of this. I'm like, you just learn so much when it's free flowing.
Yeah.
And I say to the kids now too, I'm like, when you're thinking in the game, that's a distraction.
Yeah.
I just want your body to almost have second nature at this point.
Just react.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
think the biggest fear I think now comes from social media and
Oh,
everything is image based and they
it's
care about how their what their peers think and they care about how people view them. And every athlete,
yeah.
even if they're not very good, has some like incredible highlight reel put together that
Yeah.
they're promoting out there. And how many times is it like a good defensive play? Right? It's all the stuff that people want to see, not
Yeah.
necessarily what is going to get you recruited or whatever else.
Yeah.
So I think it honestly comes from so many things beyond a coach and so many things beyond a parent. But sure, it can come from those as well.
Yeah. And you said social media, man. I mean, I played sports in high school and college and in the 80s. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? And there was no calling your parents on the weekend because the telephone was 8 blocks away to use. And once a week you called them. There was no like
Yeah.
Zooming. But what social media has created, my opinion, is the world of comparison,
Yes.
and I think once you start to compare, you remove the joy
Yeah.
of what's going on.
Right.
You know,
I
the
couldn't agree more.
and like the reality of what's happening becomes fictitious.
Well, and I mean, to that point, right? I always say compete, don't compare.
Yeah.
When you compare,
Mm.
you're already assuming you lost in some way. Right? Like you're like I remember going to Villanova and there's right playing against someone like Jana Tucker who was ranked 8th in the country coming out of high school. I'm like, how am I supposed to compete with her? She can do this, 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 this.
Yeah.
Like her defense is incredible. And then I immediately knew I took myself out of the game. I mentally
Yeah.
checked out. I
Yep.
I allowed her to win before I even stepped on the court,
Yeah.
as opposed to being like, wow, she like I can give her credit, right? Like, wow, she's really good at all these things.
Yeah.
Okay, but now this is my opportunity. This is awesome. She showed up and I showed up. Now it's
Yeah.
time to compete,
It's go
right?
time.
And then
Yeah.
and then you learn from there. And it's a perfect opportunity. You're playing against someone better than you or who you feel like has a lot more skill, right? So many kids I know now they're like, "Oh, I don't want to guard her or I don't want to play against her." I go, "Why? Do you know how much you could learn? That's
Yeah.
such an opportunity." But all they see is other people watching them in that vulnerable moment. And that's what they don't like, is that
Yeah.
vulnerability.
Wow. It's so true. So let me ask you this question. From a college basketball scenario, Villanova, BU, was there any one or two memorable moments that you said, man, this is a great experience?
I think I was just talking to one of my old teammates the other day, and it's funny, like, I think the best time we had is when we had just finished the season at Boston and we went to the Commons, the Boston Commons. We went to the park. We went down, we took the blue bikes to the Prudential Center. Like, we talked about that as if that was the highlight of our career. And I don't know if there's like the only one I could feel like I could confidently say basketball wise is when um I played a really solid game at Villanova and my mom happened to be there and some of my friends from home were there. And it wasn't just because I had a decent game, but it was more so because I was like, okay, this was for them. Like I didn't
Yeah,
it wasn't just a shit show. I like I'm someone who is like I don't want to waste people's time.
yeah.
So like in my eyes, right? It's like if I had played poorly, this would have been a waste of their time when in all actuality they just came down to see me and support me.
Well, plus, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. And just by the way, the answer doesn't have to be basketball. It could just be
Yeah.
the college world. But that what you just said there, and this is what I think happens to a lot of college athletes who your road to college athletics is paved by your parents.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is all the road trips, all the camps, the money they spend, the time on the weekends, the picking you up from school, dropping you off, whatever has to happen for all those years when you can't do it yourself, to play at that level and to play very well and to have them watch
Mm-hmm.
the gratification in their eyes is probably their eyes are probably just bursting with joy watching you down there play.
Yeah.
Because for them, it becomes it's all worth it,
Right.
And for you, it's almost like a thank you,
Yeah. And
like
that's what I think my biggest thing that I wanted out of my career
yeah,
was to give them,
yeah,
right? As much as I wanted to show people from Maine that they could play at this level or whatever, it really was like specifically knowing my mom and how many visits she took me on and
yeah,
how much time she took out of her
yeah,
life
right,
to bring me on those visits and to pay for those camps and AAU. Um, and I think that's the tough part about it's funny, I was looking at getting one of my jerseys framed actually from Villanova that I had. And it wasn't anything of I wanted it for me, but I never had a senior night. So I wanted to give it as something
mm,
for her. Like, mom, this is as much of a shit show as my career was. Like, I did make it to this level. Thankfully, we didn't have to pay for college, but
yeah,
like this is my way of like saying like
yeah.
thank you for everything you did. Um
Did you give it to her?
well, so it's still in the works of getting framed.
Okay.
But
Does she
yeah,
know you're giving it to her? Now she
huh?
does. Does she know you're going to give it to her?
No, she doesn't.
She's
She
going to
thinks
know
that I was
now.
just looking at frames. She's like, "Well, why can't you get one of these like small ones?" And I'm like, I can't tell her, "Well, mom, it's for you. This is and this in the house is where that you like could put it or whatever." So,
Yeah, that's cool. The tears will be flowing on that one.
yeah, we'll we'll see. She's been through the whole process with me, so it's probably going to be a lot of tears.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, she deserves that and more
Yeah.
for everything, but I think it's just more so like that we both made it to that level and like you said, it was worth it
Yeah.
regardless of the outcome afterwards.
Right. And I don't think, college women's basketball now is just like blown up.
Yeah.
It's like I'd rather watch that than the guy. The guys are just it's too
Mhm.
stupid. The girls are like it's cool to watch.
Yeah.
And they're getting tough. They're out there banging and bumping and
Mhm.
and the three pointers these girls shoot are incredible.
Yeah, it's become the norm.
Yeah. But I don't, I don't think the average person, for lack of better words, I don't know if that's the right word, realizes the level of basketball you were playing. At that level, it doesn't get bigger.
I mean,
You know?
it's funny because I always describe to my friends this, I would say like I was just big enough, or I played at just high enough level to where like basketball was my life for the most part, and everything was basketball practices and I'm getting extra trainings in and all this and that, but just low enough to where it's like, okay, kind of like what's the point? Like I wasn't gonna play in the WNBA,
Right.
and you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and I felt like, to me, the way I described it to myself for such a long time, like the only word that would come on like in my head as a banner was mediocre. And I think that was the tough part of like I wanted so much more, and I
But
had so
mediocre compared to what?
mediocre compared to my expectations. And I
All
think
right.
that was the
Okay.
hard part,
Okay.
right? And
All
that's
right.
where I came up with the whole idea of standards versus expectations and how we look at them often as the same thing. And now I describe it to kids. I'm like, okay, if I just had standards for myself, maybe I wouldn't have such disappointment, because standards are things that are internal, things that you can hold yourself to. Whereas expectations are things you hope for. They're external things. You can have the expectation and hope for a coach to play you a certain amount, but that's not particularly in your control. Whereas a
Mm,
standard, you can, if you have a standard of being the best teammate or being the best encourager on the team, communicator, whatever the case may be, you can hold yourself to that every single day. And you get to look in the mirror and then decide at the end of the day, did I hold myself to that standard? But I think, right, that's the tough part about expectations and what everyone says, right? Like expectations lead to disappointments, or often lead to disappointments. And I think like that was me as a kid. I always dreamed so big. Um, and then I held that idea in my head. And when it didn't happen, I immediately felt like, well, this is a failure. You know what I mean? That was the only
yeah.
way for such a long time I could look at it. I was like, this isn't even a story worth sharing at this
Yeah.
point.
So it's so funny. So it's where were you for you back then?
Yeah,
Because right now you have all the cool answers. Like, it's a learning moment. You're not failing, you're
right.
learning. But like, where were you for you when you were 19?
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, that's the full circle moment I've had recently. Actually, it's on my vision board. It was, she needed a hero, so she became one. And it's just one of those things of, um, like sometimes had wished that I had an older sister that I could just kind of talk to,
Yeah.
and right, because like two older brothers, as much as I love them and as much as they're like my champions, it's one of those things of like they
They're
just say
guys.
everything very like matter of fact
Yeah.
with lack of like EQ, and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this was not what I needed to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I don't know, it's right, like you figure that out as you go, and um I think that's what kids need now. So that's kind of like the process that I've taken, and I'm really big on you got to give purpose for your pain to be worth it. And that's like been on repeat the past couple weeks of like everything that doesn't necessarily go your way. It's like, okay, it's such a cliche, but like what lesson is it teaching you? And I think that's the best thing that I've gotten in the habit of, as opposed to being like, well, of course this didn't go my way, or
Yeah.
just mulling over the negativity of it. It's like, no, what is this teaching me? And actually being still for a moment to try and figure it out. Um, but again, of course, that's something you figure out later down the road.
Yeah. But for you, it's not that far. It's not like you're 40 years old just figuring it out. Like you're figuring this out at a very young age, which is great.
Well, that's very reassuring to hear. I feel like it's taken me a long time,
No,
but
no, no. So what advice? I mean, you're talking about some really, you know, intense stuff, right? So what advice can you give the young seniors, juniors coming out of high school to prepare them for what's in front of them when they step on campus day one?
I would say the biggest thing is figure out who you are before you're told who to be.
Ooh,
And that has been my like running slogan recently because I said this on another podcast. I said, right, we wonder how people get so good at basketball or whatever their craft is. And it's like, well, they show up and they practice. They practice that every day and they practice it in different ways. They watch film, they lift, their nutrition, their sleep, right? There's a multitude of things that come into play. And it's like you wonder how someone becomes a better version of themselves. They have to practice being themselves.
yeah,
And it's such a simple idea in comparison, but I think we miss it sometimes because so often we sit back and we observe and we look at things that we want and we pick things off of other people that we want to be like. We're like, oh, I really like this about this person. And oh, I want to be like that. And witnessing it is one thing, but doing the work is a whole nother game. And I
yeah,
think that's the part that we often miss and doing the work, right? That's hard because we have to look in the mirror, but also because we have to like understand like, okay, what do I value? As Emily, what can I sit here and write down as 5 values for myself? What are the standards I have for myself? What are my non-negotiables? And I've done some of these exercises with kids, and it's funny because half the time they'll be like, "Wait, can you give me an example?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I give them some of mine. And next thing you know, I'm like, all
they're
right, does
taking
anyone
yours.
want what?
They start taking yours.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Or right. I'm like, all right, I'll give you guys plenty of time. If you have questions, let me know. And I'll look over and some of them are like looking at their friend sheet and like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, that's my point right there. Right. We are so afraid to sit with ourselves and become friends with ourselves and have a relationship with ourselves that the easiest thing to do is look at who or what is next to you and pick that up and like, okay, well what does this person value, or what does my best friend think about this? Does she think it's cool? Right.
Mhm.
And it comes back to a podcast I was on. They were asking the question of like, what's your favorite ice cream? Right, something so simple, no right or wrong answer. And she was like, huh, I don't even know. But she knew her best friend's, like, if you were to ask her best friend's like favorite color or ice cream, she could answer it right away. And I was like, that is the perfect example of so often, like, we just sit back and we observe everything going on in front of us, but we rarely take inventory of ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that would be my biggest advice is just sit down and figure out who you are before you're told who to be, because you're going to have a lot of, well, this is what you need to do and da 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 da, and you're going to have a lot of criticism, which honestly isn't a bad thing. And I promise if you know who you are, you can take that so much better than if you aren't confident in who you are. It's a lot easier for things to roll off your shoulder because you know what you value and you know who you are. And what
Yeah.
this person says isn't going to affect that. And not in a cocky way, just
Yeah.
in a, I'm confident in who I am and in my good intentions.
Yeah. So can you go deeper? You have to practice on being yourself,
Yeah.
right? Can you go there might be some people saying like, what does she mean by that? What
Yeah.
what, what does that really mean? What are they really doing?
I think, right, as simple as it may seem, but something like journaling, right?
Mm,
I said I had a journal for coaches. Have a journal for yourself.
yeah.
What are, maybe you have consistent thoughts through the day. What's trending in your mind? At the end of a tough day, what's your thought process? Right? And like, how do you write that out? What's your routine? And I say that's one example. And then if you can really, like, when I say take inventory, I really mean like sit down someday and be like, okay, what are my standards that I have for myself? And if you can list, like I always say, a list of 5, but if you can list more than that, or you have more you want to put down, by all means, like list your standards that you have for yourself, whether that's in basketball, but I would challenge you more so to do it outside of whatever sport you play. Like your standards for yourself are like, are you a person of your word? Right?
Mm,
Like I think that's a huge standard. Are you respectful? Owned and earned respect. Um, do you work hard and not just at the things you like, but the things you don't like? You know what I mean? I think there are so many things that can fall under that umbrella. And then figuring out what you value in life and prioritizing that accordingly. Um, but I want to say, like, one of the main things too is if you can spend time with yourself, whether that's going on, like, I try and go on a 2 mile walk every day. And there are times where it's like, oh, I want to listen to a certain podcast and I'll do that. But there are other times where I force myself, I'm like, I'm not bringing any headphones, I'm not bringing my phone. I really just, right? It's like almost those shower thoughts that you have,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
you can't be on your phone. So it's that a time where you're forced to be quiet. But sometimes, like for me, my mind just goes and it thinks of all these different things or these projects I want to do, or maybe about something I heard earlier that day that I liked or that I didn't like. And I'm someone who, like, I can act as someone else and have a conversation about that thing. And, like, my mom is so great at playing devil's advocate, so I
Yeah.
think I've learned to do that in my head, so I have to try and argue my points, and as, like, crazy as that sounds, I'm like, you really do start to figure yourself out, but, right, like, how do you get close with a friend? You hang out with them a decent amount, you start to learn who they are.
Yeah.
You gotta be comfortable going and doing things by yourself.
Well, how do you fall asleep if you keep talking to yourself all night?
Well, that's exactly why I just listened to a podcast. If you journal, just word
Yep.
vomit anything that comes to your mind
Yep.
for 10 to 15 minutes, you will fall asleep 50% faster than normal. You just get all your thoughts out. But
So how
usually
many
I do it
journals do
when
you
I'm
have?
walking. Hmm?
How many journals do you have? Like, have you gone through four, five, six, 10 of them?
Yeah, I probably have, yeah, 6 of them.
Do you keep them, or do you, when you're done, you chuck them?
There's a couple I've kept, and some of them I'm someone who, like, if I'm like I really didn't like that time period, or I don't want to see what's in that. A couple of them I threw in the bonfire.
All right. Well, it's a good way to move on too.
Yeah,
And
for
to
me
close
at
out
least,
that
that's how
chapter,
I view
throw in
it.
the bonfire. See you later. Done.
Yeah, yep.
You know, that's good. Yeah. So, all right, let's throw you back in college now. Let's
Hmm.
go to that world, and it doesn't. It could be Villanova, BU, doesn't matter. What significant setbacks did you face? I know you had a couple of bumps in the road along the way, but
Yeah.
what stood out the most? Like, man, this was a tough one.
Hmm. I felt like every year was a different adjusting process. And I think maybe it was my 2 years at Villanova to my first year at BU, right? My first year at Villanova, I'm adjusting to inevitable changes of being in college, being away from home. Now you're on a team where everyone's as good as you, if not better, and you're figuring out your place and you're not playing. And now you're having to go to classes at a college level at a strong university. And at that point, I had to go to one of our academic advisors. I'm like, listen, I don't know what it is. Like, I can't get my test done in time. I'm like struggling to understand these concepts. I'm going to my study all hours. And so I ended up getting tested and they were like, hey, you have ADHD. And she gave me this list of other things. And all it said was like a list down the right hand column. And it was like, not sufficient, not sufficient, not sufficient.
Hmm.
And I took that. I'm like, I'm not even, my self worth was like dropping immensely. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to go to the second page. I I threw that out. Of course, she emailed me the copy after that. Um, but I say that because, like, for me to learn a play in practice was also difficult. So not only did it affect me in the classroom, but it affected my ability on the court to a certain extent. So I would always ask to go over plays extra times. And, like, we would have a couple of teammates who would be like, Emily, we literally just went over this 3 times. How don't you get it? But for me to understand it, like, I'm someone who I had to see it and I also had to do it.
Yep.
And that part was really difficult because you feel so inadequate when you've always been praised for being such a good athlete, and that's all that I projected to people, right? Like I only projected that I was like, I'm just an athlete, this is who I am. And they're like, oh, you're Emily the basketball player. I'm like, yep, that's me. But I never, right, like I never told
Yeah.
them all the things that I struggled with, and that's where you're going to connect with people. But so freshman year was hard because of that, and then going into my sophomore year at Villanova, um, a lot of dynamics had changed, and my head coach's health wasn't doing as well. And so I think there was some frustration with that and some resentment of, well, why couldn't he be the same guy who had recruited me just 2 years prior? And that was a tough one too, because when I ended up, like, I realize it now that I had gone through a stage of depression because I wouldn't go to classes. And even my roommate would be like, Emily, don't you have class tonight at this time? And I'm like, yeah. She goes, well, shouldn't you be heading over there now? I'm like, I don't feel like going today. And she'd be like, Emily, you didn't go last time. And at the time I just thought like, oh, I'm a college athlete. I'm just tired all the time because
Yeah.
we wake up at 5:30, we have film, we have conditioning and all this and that. And looking back, I'm like, no, I was depressed. I wouldn't go to anything except practice, occasionally classes and film and my PT appointments. And that was really it. And so when I transitioned to um, Boston, that was one of my key points when I was transferring out of there. I said, listen, I want to become a better person, a better leader, and a better player, and in that order. And I knew this change was going to be for me as a person, not for me as an athlete. And that part was hard because that was me taking a leap of faith. That was something I'd never done before. And it was kind of funny. Like Harry even told me, he was like, Emily, you know, you're throwing your basketball career away, right? And I looked at, again, he's very to the point, and I just kind of looked at him and I'm like, you know, Harry, I guess so. But at this point, I have to figure something out. And so when I transferred to Boston, I transferred there mainly because Coach Mo was one of the only coaches who confidently said, I can help you do that. I can help you become a better person, a better leader, and a better player, and in that order. And so for me, that was very reassuring. And the fact that she got along really well with my mom, like if you get along with my mom or whatever, my mom's like my best friend, so that's why I'm very big on, if you get my mom's approval, then
You're good.
you're like, yeah, family.
Yeah.
Um, but that was tough too because I was transferring to a lower level, and people thought they didn't really know the reason I left Villanova. And I didn't feel comfortable speaking on it at the time because I said it's not my job and it's not my place to speak on something my coach is going through. And so I took I think a majority of the brunt in terms of people viewing me as kind of either stuck up, or she didn't get along with the coach, or she wasn't getting the amount of minutes that she wanted, which honestly, I was starting at the end of my redshirt freshman year at Villanova. And I had said to my coaches multiple times, and people would ask, I'm like, honestly, this is like a gift to me. I didn't think I really even deserved to be in that spot. Not that I wasn't putting in the work, but it just was like a miracle to me that I was able to be like a starting member on that team. And then transferring to Boston, I had to sit out again because I couldn't get a waiver. So you have to relive everything because you're trying to plead your case. You have
Yep.
to relive everything you went through at Villanova. I had I had to go non-weight bearing for 6 weeks because they found a stress fracture on my femur. And so I'm like, that adds to it. And now like I'm someone who, if I can't move, if I can't work out, it already takes a toll on me. Like that's like my stress release is just being able to work out and kind of get out of my head and into my body. And so I'm like, all right, this is a tough one. And then now I have to tell this coach who just recruited me that I have all these learning disabilities and that I can't play for her. But like, hey, thanks for picking me up. And as I said earlier, like I'm a big proponent, like I hate wasting people's time or feeling like I gypped them of something. And in that moment, I was like, wait, she just went through all of this to allow me to be part of her program. And honestly, that staff and that team, and here I am injured, and they're having to worry about me trying to get a waiver that's not working, and they're taking time out of their day to do all this. Um, and I like that was the first time that week when it all kind of happened at once that I had my first panic attack. And I'm like, God, please just don't let me go back to what it was when I was at Villanova. Like, please just let me grow from this opportunity. Um, and I would say those were like the three main points that were the hardest for me to adjust to physically and mentally.
Pretty intense, you know. So you hit the campus at BU. How well did the team receive you? Were they excited that, hey, I got this young girl from Villanova coming over here?
I think they were excited not because of me, but because of the welcoming group they are or they were. Um, it honestly was a really good group of girls, and that's another reason why I chose to go there is because it really did it like had that family feel, and Coach Mo really felt like a player's coach. And I mean KB and DB, they were the assistant coaches at the time. They felt the same way. Um, and I don't know, they were great. They reached out to me, they checked in on me when I needed things, but I was still in this spot of I didn't want to be a burden to other people. So I wasn't going to fully tell you everything that was going on. I
Yeah,
was just going to say like, "Oh, yeah, I'd joke and I'd be like, "Oh, it was a rough day getting down campus." When in all actuality, like I'd have a rough morning and just spend time by myself because I didn't want to like right my misery doesn't like company as much as people are like, oh, misery, I was like,
yeah.
I just want to get away. I don't want to be a burden to anyone. I just want to like feel this and try and figure it out on my own. um where I've learned recently that that's not the way to go
It's
about
not the
it.
way to do it.
Yeah.
Wow. So were there resources for you there at BU to help handle that stuff?
Yes. I mean, one, Coach Mo was really good. Like she sat down with me, and when like our academic person or um Aaron was his name, he came in and he was the one who told our compliance guy. He was the one who came in and said, like, you didn't get the waiver. And I was just like stabbed to the heart because not like I redshirted 1 year, so I didn't play, and then I did play, and now I'm not playing again. I'm like, all right, this feels like it's going nowhere. And I remember everything that was the day kind of everything happened at once, and I just started crying. And it was in front of Coach Mo. And at first I'm like, this is so embarrassing. And then she just put her arm around me and like pulled me in, and I was like, okay, this like it doesn't have to like it's not embarrassing. It's a frustrating moment,
An
and it's
emotion.
yeah, and it's okay to feel it, right? Like and there is emotion in sport and there's emotion in life. And a majority of the time like we just try to mask it. And so I think that was I don't know, one of the key points that I really felt like seen and heard. But the other thing was um she was very open about like her life and things that she had gone through, and she encouraged me. She's like, "Emily, why don't you just try therapy? You don't have to stick with it, but why don't you just try it?" And at first I was like, Coach Mo, like going to some random person and telling them all my problems. And she's like, all right, well, when you put it that way, but she's like, but that's why you have to like build a relationship with them, da 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 da. Da. And she said it in a very manageable way for me to kind of understand it. And at the point, like, I was like, okay, I can't do a ton of physical activity. I have to find a different outlet. And so I ended up going to therapy. And the first lady I went to, we did not click. But I ended up connecting with a different one, and it was this older gentleman, and we hit it off. And we're able to figure it out. But the reason the lady and I kind of didn't work out, she said, I came in there and she goes, well, what's going on? And I told her some of the things. And she was like, well, why don't you just take a semester? It seems like you're going through a lot. Why don't you just take a semester off? And I'm like, I'm a college athlete. I don't feel like you're here. Like, this is not just
Yeah.
like you take off,
We
like
don't take off.
they're paying for my school. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how this works in your world, but this doesn't work in mine. And so I don't know, it felt like we were so drastically had different visions. Um, it's okay, I got to figure out a different avenue. And so then I found this other guy and he was great and he kept it very simple for me. Um, and I went to him for, I think, the rest of that year. Um, but there are absolutely resources. But one of the things that I really want to point out is that Coach Mo didn't just tell me, hey, go to behavioral health, right? Like, that feels very disingenuous. Like, if I'm to just randomly say that to a kid, but because, right, like athletes now, and I say this because I've been on both sides of the coaching realm. Like, I've been a player in college and I've been a graduate assistant, and I've seen how good coaches have done, and I've
Yeah.
seen what not so great coaches have done. They don't need you to fix a problem necessarily. These athletes, right? Like, the whole thing of they just want to be heard.
Yeah.
The thing that I came out with was I say this to my mom all the time, and I've said it to coaches now. I said, not every problem or not every situation is a problem to be solved. Sometimes it's just something
Mm.
to be like to be managed. Meaning I just need you in that moment to sit there, maybe let me vent, and not try and fix it or not always try and give me advice, but just say that it's going to be okay. And again, that's one of those things that sounds so simple, but it's so hard for people to do because in that moment they want to be problem solvers. And my other point to that is they'd rather have those conversations with their coaches, right? Like, I'm a very relationship based person. Like, one of the reasons I initially picked Villanova was because of Harry. The reason I picked Boston was because of Coach Mo. And so I say all that to say, like, these kids, as much as they want to put up a front, like, they can see and understand and feel if there's a genuine connection there or not. And a lot of these kids, if they're picking their school because of coaches, they want you almost to be their first line of defense.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you have to be a medical professional or a mental health specialist. You just have to be you and be empathetic and be able to embrace them. And that is it. And like, a majority of the coaches out there, I think, have that capability. They just think they need to have all the answers. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
Now, do you speak to coaches as well?
I don't, but some people have asked me recently if I would get into that. And I told them yes, because I feel like so often I speak on like the athlete's behalf,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like, I've been really big on saying, like, in college athletics and life in general, right? Like, everything is a two-way street. And as much as these players need to be cared for, these coaches need to be cared for too.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the moment, especially like Coach Mo, she was 9 years at UConn, right? I looked at her like had this superstar aura. And I can't remember what happened, which is probably the point that it was nothing big at all. And I was saying something to my mom, and she goes, Emily, I know that you look at Coach Mo in this way and that she is this superstar and that she has it all figured out. And she is. She's a great person. But that's what you have to understand. She is not just Coach Mo. She is a person too. So the
It's a close
grace
friend.
you want from her, you need to give it to her too. And
Do
when
you
my
see your
mom
mother
said
saying that
that,
to you?
when my mom said that to me, I'm like,
Wow.
that was the moment where I'm like, Mom, I called so that you could support me. But it was the perfect point she made.
Yeah.
It was very
Yeah.
much like, you're so right. We oftentimes just want to think of how everything affects us, and not at all how it affects the coach or the staff or the program. Um, and I think that's honestly credit to my mom for giving me a better perspective there.
Mm.
But yeah, these coaches, they don't have it easy.
No.
And I think a lot of times we think they do because they're the boss or they have the authority over us. Um, but they're in tough positions too. And
I
I
am.
think if we can all pull in the same direction, right? Like I always think it's so ironic, right? The transfer portal has kind of put this divide between players and coaches.
Yeah.
And it's so ironic because it's like, what are we all in college athletics to do? To be on a team sport and
Yeah.
win. And the
Right.
team sport is players and coaches, not just players versus the coaches. Um, so I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah, the world of college sports now with the NIL and the transfer portal rules. And now you get 5 years to play five. JUCO doesn't count. Like all these
Yeah.
crazy rule changes. Like it's almost like, okay, forget it. Why don't we just finally say what the coach I never say his name right from UConn.
Gino Auriemma.
Oriyama. I always
Yeah.
always want to say Uriyama. It's Oriyama, right? And he was on some interview not too long ago, and it's like, why can't we just tell the truth? That these
Yeah.
are professional athletes playing for
Yeah.
colleges. How about they just major in their sport
Yeah.
and forget the education? You know what I
Right.
mean? It's just major in your sport, have to learn the sport. It's a full-time job,
Right.
and pay them.
Hmm.
And that's it because they're bringing in the revenue. I mean, I can go on and on about it forever, but the world of college sports is now become it's all about what is the school going to do for the player,
Hmm.
not what's the player going to do for the team.
Right.
You
And I
know, and
think that part is tough to see. I don't know. I think of it in a way as what disservice are we doing to these kids? Um, right. When you, and it's, and right, ironic coming from me, someone who transferred, but like what message are we sending to these kids when it's like, okay, there's no 1 year transfer rule where where you have to sit out a year or you
right.
can't transfer within conference or all these rules to encourage you to stay there, to build something, to trust your coach, to work through these hardships.
Yep.
And like if you don't like something, you can easily leave. If you want more money, you can easily leave. I just think there's so much innocence taken away and so many
Yeah.
life lessons that we eliminate by having this kind of protocol put in place to where it's like free game essentially
Yeah.
for everyone. Um, so that part is kind of hard to see. But
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that as a stickler and like completely against NIL, but I see both sides.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's two sides, and I think what's going to start to happen, in my own opinion, is they're going to start to pay these coaches retention bonuses to retain their athletes. To
Hmm.
get these kids to stay.
Yeah.
And because right now there's nothing to do to keep them to keep them, yeah,
Right.
outside of paying them. But there's got to be a way. Hey, you know what, coach? You're losing too many kids every year. You can't have these kids come in and one and done all the time. You got
Yeah.
to keep kids at least 3 years. If you do, we'll pay you X amount of money. That just might change the way they coach. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's crazy,
Yeah.
crazy stuff. So I want to get into what you're doing for a living.
Okay.
Because that's some really really cool stuff, and I put together a whole slew of questions. But my first just question to you: what inspired that business? Where did it come from? I know to me it's obvious where you got the name from, but why
Yeah.
don't you explain where that how that came together and what your business is all about?
Yeah. So initially I created it actually when I was still in college. Empowerment came from my name. I'm like, okay, what do I like to do? And it was kind of funny because it was a word that was thrown around like empowerment this, empowerment that, and we want to empower these people. And it was kind of a word at the time that was thrown around a lot. But then I was like, but I really do like in terms of uplifting people, encouraging people, showing them their gifts, that's what I really enjoy doing. And so I just had right, you have to come up with a name to kind of brand it.
Yeah,
And then it initially just started out as a communications project. And it was you had to write a couple blogs and turn it in on Wix. And so I did that and then I kind of had a fun time. I was like trying to, okay, like, wait, you can make a website out of this. So I was kind of working around with that. And then before I turned it in, I handed it to one of my teammates and I'm like, hey, like, can you just check this for grammar? I don't worry about anything else, just the grammar part of it. And she handed it back and she's like, wait, Emily, this is really good. Like, I think this could open a lot of people's eyes. And I think it would honestly just encourage people. And I'm like, okay, well, I just told you to just check the grammar, not read any, or not like actually read it. And she goes, no, seriously. So she gave it to one of my other teammates and she's like, I'm not just saying this. Let's see what she says. So she gave it to her and she goes, yeah, I agree with her. Like, I think, and I didn't at the time really get what they were saying. And I think it's just because I was like, right, it was something that I just wrote down that I experienced firsthand. How could this be something to inspire, encourage, or impart wisdom on someone else? I couldn't grasp that.
So you were writing about you in that.
Yeah, I was just writing about me and but it was more so like my whole standards versus expectations thing. How I came up with that was I was on the bus back from Colgate and I was just sitting and it's one of those times where I'm like I was like, all right, Emily, no listening to music. And I was just thinking of everything that had kind of happened that weekend and where my disappointments were and where I fell short. And and then I kind of came up with, well, that we always like interchange standards and expectations, right? Like, you got to have standards and expectations. It's like, wait, no, those aren't the same things. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, what are they to me? And like, what's the difference? And so then I started writing it down and I eventually put it into a blog. So it was more like moments like that, the behind the scenes and the in between moments, right? Like, as an athlete in high school, I was so used to writing about the big game and the game winning shot. And it was like, no, there was so much more to this. It was like physically and mentally things that I was going through and things that were challenging, right? Like, we talked about, everyone wants to share all the good stuff, but no one wants to be vulnerable and share those hard moments. When in all actuality, that's where you connect with people the most, right? Is like, oh my God, she went through that too. Wait, like, she's more human than I thought. Or wait, she's not just a basketball player. She has ADHD too. Oh, I have, right? Like, it's, I don't know. You don't look at that as a high schooler. You think it's embarrassing. You like think you're stupid or whatever. And it's like, wait, this is a normal thing that a decent amount of people deal with it. Great. Now we have something else to connect about.
Yeah.
Um, so it kind of started through that, and it really, all the frustrating times and the things I had kind of gone through in school, um, and some of my hardest moments, it was a way for me to get it out without feeling like I was putting it on someone else. It
Hmm.
was more of like I was putting it out there and you could take it if you want, but you weren't like really burdened with it. Um, and then it started to build in like, hey, would you want to like work like just talk about kind of what you went through? And I'm like, at the time, like, I was not someone, I hated speaking in front of people.
Now, who
I
was asking you to do that? Was that like teams and schools asking
that
you?
that would be, yeah, like my old athletic director, some coaches, teammates who were coaching youth teams. And even then I was like, oh, like, no, I don't really want to do that. Or to like be the keynote speaker at a graduation. And I'm like I was the kid when I was younger. I hated like I could not order my own food. I'd like nudge my mom and be like, "Mom, you know what I want?" And like make her, I was painfully shy. Um, but it more so I understood it became a way of like forcing me to advocate for myself, right? Like, it became like when I saw about like how people talked about me and how people told my story, I was like I got mad at myself. I'm like, Emily, you did this to yourself. You never advocated for yourself. You didn't tell your story. You allowed other people to tell it for you because you're so afraid to speak up and speak out. And so I don't know, it was really eye-opening, right? Trial and error, figuring out, okay, what does this mean, and is my story even worth sharing? I mean, look at it. It kind of just fell apart. And that's when I came up with another blog. I'm like, your story doesn't have to be the ESPN 30 for 30 or the picture, the movie perfect thing to be worth sharing, right?
Yeah.
Like, people are going to connect with the shit shows. And so then I was like, okay, I forced myself to speak to a couple kids, to work with some AAU teams. And for me, it more so started out with while I was training, I'd give them mental tips. And then, okay, I got a little bit more comfortable of like, okay, if I can do this in this kind of setting, maybe I can just speak to the kids. So I ended up getting certified in life coaching and mental performance training. And then I recently got certified in speed and agility and personal training. And I say that because I wanted to take a holistic approach to working with kids or working with teams where it's not just the one thing that's bothering that kid or that coach. It's that one thing that's tied to all these different things that are affecting them. It's just they see this one symptom or they feel and notice this one symptom. And so that's how I've kind of built it. And now I've started working with more teams, whether it's high school or I'll do one-on-one mental training sessions with some college players. Um, but it's definitely been an experience. And I think it's interesting because I think so often I'm so quick to say, like, you got to own your greatness and it all just starts with a decision and da 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 da, and it's like, Emily, where's the mirror? Because you're saying all this and is that not what you need to hear? um so it's been honestly a great tool as well, like in terms of for others, but to hold me accountable of
Yeah.
like, Emily, you can't just, right, like you can't be empowering people if you yourself don't feel empowered. um right, like you have to
Yeah.
be able to speak with
I
conviction.
think it sounds like it's just forcing you to continue to grow,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool. You're like, I can't tell them to do something I'm not doing myself.
Yeah. And I think that's why there's this like almost love-hate relationship, because I saw a quote one time. It's like, if you can't lead by example, don't be vocal. And I'm like, that is so me. Like, I can't, I'm so hesitant. I can't tell you to do something either that like I don't know how to do, or that I'm questioning, or that I don't believe in. Like, I want to give you the best information and I want to uplift and encourage you because I believe in it. And right. And it's that relationship with yourself. Like, I always tell kids, have this best friend advice, right? Like, if you've been bricking how many layups, are you going to say to your best friend on the team, are you kidding me? You can't make a layup. You suck. Da 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 da. And it's like, would you say that? And they're like, absolutely not. And I'm like, wait, so why is that what goes through your head when you miss it? And they were like, well, it's not the same. And I go, what do you mean it's not the same? Think of yourself as your best friend, and
Yeah.
there's no way to get around it. They're like, wow, okay, that is just, it's not even like constructive criticism. It's just being negative. So I think that's a little bit what it is for me too, and why I do value it. But yeah, to your point, it's one of those things where it's like you can't just get comfortable. It forces you to continue to grow.
So if with your company, one of the thoughts is principles, values. Do you have core values that hey, this is how we teach, this is how we learn, this is how we grow?
I mean, yes and no. I have all, like, I think in quotes, in phrases that I come up with. And the biggest one, it's funny, I have it right here, but my biggest thing was like empathize, embrace, empower. And
That's
ideally
cool.
that's like the steps that we take, right? Like having empathy, and I learned this from my mom as a nurse, right? To have empathy for people. And what does that look like? It's not just like judging them and feeling bad for them, but no, like really, like they might be in a tough situation or something, they're going through something. Can you empathize with them and like really try to see from their perspective where they're hurting, and just be with it. And like maybe if they need a friend, be that friend to sit with them in it. Again, you don't have to have the answers. And when you can empathize with someone, it is much much easier. And half the time it flows right into it, being able to embrace someone. And isn't that what the best teams do? What the best coaches do is embrace every part, every person that's part of that program. Like Coach Kellogg at West Virginia always says, be you, but align with us. And I think that's the idea of embracing, right? Is like you want them to come as they are, and now, right, we're using all the things and gifts that you have to offer to pull in the same direction, right? Like that's the idea behind a team. Can
Yeah.
we embrace each other? Not just player to player, but player to coach, coach to player, coaches together. Um, and I think inevitably that trickles down into once we can embrace each other, now the next step is like being really intentional and empowering each other. What does that look like? That looks like showing each other our gifts. Like, right? Not being threatened by all the greatness this person has, but understanding like, okay, like I have a lot of greatness too, but I'm not going to point that out to everyone. I'm going to encourage all those around me because that's what we do, right? It's this whole idea of connection. Like you
Yeah.
see the best teams, the ones that often win, like I always think of the Spurs. It's like the connection they had, the ability to uplift each other, right? Like Tim Duncan was so good, one of the best leaders. He was that leader that would always take accountability for everything that went wrong and give away the praise to all his
Yep.
teammates and coaches when everything went right.
What good leaders do.
Yeah. And so I would say those are kind of the three like things that I hone in on, but I have like own your greatness. And I always say that one, like what are some of our pillars, is like one of them's own your greatness. And what does that mean? I always say like own your greatness because you can't acquire more if you don't own what you already have. And half the time as kids, like, what do you mean? I'm like, all right, we'll do a goal sheet. Write down 3 things that you're good at, 3 things you want to get better at, and how you're gonna do it. And they immediately skip the good part, what they're good at, because they're so reluctant to own the things that they're good at. They just want to go to, oh, well, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this. And I'm like, okay, but that's halfway down the sheet. I'm asking you to write what are the things you're good at right now. Um, so again, it's all these different things that I've kind of come up with, like your worth never wavers, own your story, own your worth, all these different things that like are just little sayings that I've had that I'm like, all right, Emily, this needs to be a pillar of your life. And now it's kind of like empowerment is one thing that I'm like, it's just an extension of me in a really vulnerable form.
You gotta get a hat with a 3E on it,
I know I
right?
should.
You know, the 3E philosophy.
Yes. Now I'm writing that down for idea. You'll get royalty on it.
All right, all right. So let me ask you this. So people that are listening probably say, well, who are her clients? Who does she speak to? Where does she go? So what's your ideal person, group, individual, whatever, that you feel you bring the most value to?
I want to say high school female athletes. Um, but I just got asked to speak with a Girl Scout group, which I'm really intrigued with because I don't want it to just be sport specific, right? I just worked with some hockey players and it's like I love that I can connect with them based on okay, like who wants to play in college and what are your like dreams and aspiration, but it's really tough sometimes. Like I don't want what I say to fall on deaf ears, or I don't want something to connect or like to not connect with them. And so I feel like it's difficult with a bigger group because, right? Like I want to cater to every person. I want everyone to walk out of there with something that they're like, "Wait, that
Wow.
like shifted my perspective."
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that's what every speaker, every person who wants to go out there and encourage others wants. So I enjoy working with high level female athletes, but I also like just working with kids one on one. I love because they can't rely on their peer
Yep.
to answer for them. They aren't as worried about image and right, like they're put on the spot. They can't, it's just a space where they can't defer. So
Yeah.
now they have to speak up. Now they have to like say what they value. And if they don't know, that's a perfect opportunity for you to help them without giving them the answers. Um, so I really do enjoy the one-on-one because I think it's a perfect opportunity to get, all right, this kid, I can cater to them and what they need and what they want, while allowing them to figure out some of this stuff out on their own. But I also like the team camaraderie part. So I don't know. I guess I don't have a clear specific. Um, but I'm still in the stage of figuring out like
Yeah.
what kids need, right? Like for me, I just found out a couple weeks ago, like the sixth graders that I was working with, right? They're not at that point yet where they're worried about image. So they're goofy, they're fun, they
Yeah.
all want to raise their hand. But the
Yeah.
moment I get to the freshmen in high school and I ask a question and it's like, no, guys, this isn't a trick question. The answer is right in front of you. Like I actually just wrote it on the board. And half of them are like looking around, waiting for someone else to raise their hand. I'm like, guys, this
Yeah.
is the opportunity. Like, step up and be the first, right? Be the leader, take action, and then the others will
Well,
follow.
yeah.
But that's the
Yeah.
hardest part.
So where do you think you're bringing the most value? And maybe, this is not a good question, but is it on the athletic side or the mental side?
I think right now, I would say the mental side. I like to take like if I do a one-on-one with a kid, we have a mental training session. Like we'll go through some things, but I also like, right? Like I use athletics as the driving vehicle. So I'll use it like I'll do this one drill where I got it from the NBA Combine. They shoot 4 shots, both elbows, both baselines, and then you throw it down the court. And usually, of course, in the NBA, they're all going down dunking. For the high school girls, I'm like, I just need you to make a layup.
Yeah.
And I was doing this with one of the girls who plays in college, and she came down. She The goal as a competitor, obviously, you're like, oh, I want to make all 5, especially if this is what I'm ending on, if this is the drill I'm ending on. So we set it up, and she would always hit the first 3 and then miss the 4th one and make the layup. So she'd only miss that one. And she swore it was that side. She's like, I think it's just that side. I'm like, all right, totally fine. Let's just switch. You'll finish on this baseline. Did the same thing. She was always missing that 4th one. And I'm like, so we did it like 5 times. She was getting really frustrated. I stopped her for a second. I'm like, okay, what are you telling yourself on that last shot? Because clearly it's not the spot. We've decided that. It's not
Probably
the
going,
spot.
don't miss, don't miss, don't miss.
Yes. And that's exactly, she was like, well, I've just made these first 3. So now I'm telling myself, like, right, this is like, I don't want to miss. So I'm just like, all right, don't miss. And I'm like, okay, I see where you're coming from. But like Simon Sinek says it all the time, you can't think in the negative, meaning like if you say, don't think of a pink elephant, someone just thought of a pink elephant, right? So when you're saying don't miss, don't miss, don't miss, all you're thinking about is missing.
Right.
And I said, that's why I always, right? You can only have one thought in your head at a time. So that's why I always said, like, when I was in high school, I was very decisive. Like, I had a word. Even if it didn't feel right, like the shot didn't come out, my hand didn't feel right, everything, I would always say money. On a free throw, money, because it occupies your brain. Then you can't think negatively, right? And so I'm like, all right, I just need you to come up with a word, right? Because right now we're thinking too much. So now we're distracting ourselves. It's like, think of one concise word, something either that like encourages you, like for me, money, cash, I don't know, something that has a positive connotation for you. And so she came up with her word. First time we did it, she had missed a couple of the first 2 shots. So it was like, okay, this works out perfectly because she didn't miss that one. And then she did it afterwards and she made all 5 of them. And I'm like, okay, don't lie to me. But did you say your word? She goes, yeah, I actually said it on every single one. And like now I wasn't thinking about the last shot I took. I was thinking about the one I was about to take. Because every time I shot, I said my word. And I'm like, and that's how it should be. Keep it simple. Keep it, right? Like, I think that's one of the things Gino always says at Kiss. Keep it simple,
Yep.
stupid. And I don't know, like figuring out things like that and being able to put it together just using athletics. I'm like, that can work for stuff in your life too, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I think it's still very much a work in progress. I said to someone the other day, I was like, it's funny. They called me and they were like, Emily, like, I love what you're doing with empowerment and da 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 da. I go, Honestly, like I really appreciate hearing that right now because I was just thinking like sitting here, I was like, I don't really know if I'm making an impact. And so I like had thought about just like, all right, why not just delete the account and whatever and I can kind of move on. And she was like, no, like things take time. And I'm like, that's also what I needed to hear because this is exactly what I preach to these kids. And like, it's not going to happen overnight. You just have to believe and it's consistent work. And if you keep holding yourself to those standards, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not guaranteed that it's going to happen. But if you don't hold yourself to those standards, it's guaranteed it's not going to happen. And so I don't know. I think it was very much like a full circle moment of like, Emily, sometimes you just got to take your own advice and not be so preachy with it to other people.
that's hard to do.
Yes.
It's hard to
I thought
do.
it was just me, but I'm glad you're saying that.
No, it's hard to do. It's easy to tell somebody, "Hey, go do that."
Yeah.
So speaking of challenges, what kind of challenges are you facing now as a business owner trying to grow and develop your career? What kind of hurdles do you jump over now?
I would say it's for me the logistics sides of like the bank statements and setting up an account for like a nonprofit or like an LLC and all that stuff was really intimidating for me initially. And now I've had some like parents who have guided me in the right direction and been a great support system to help me. But I think in terms of the actual work itself is like still believing and having confidence that I have a story worth sharing, right? Like the further I get away from college, I'm like, is it still relevant to these kids? Like, will they still find um a life lesson or purpose in it? Or am I just kind of like up here just talking to talk? And I don't know. I think I go through seasons of that where like some days are better than others and I'm like, "Wait, I think I just hit the jackpot. I know what this age group and this group of kids needs to hear." Um and then sometimes it feels like I strike out and the pulse is gone. Um but I don't know. I think it's being willing to get up and bat every time.
Yeah,
I think that's the tough part, right? Is like it's not I don't know, missing a game winner at this point seems insignificant to going up to in front of a crowd of people and like either flopping on what you said or messing up your words or whatever the case may be. Now it's like, wait, why was I ever nervous to take that shot? Like
yeah,
this is just a new kind of nervous. Um, which is good. Again, it's like what holds me accountable, what allows me to grow.
yeah.
And it's very much like a constant mirror in my face.
But you keep raising your own bar, and you keep setting a new floor.
Yeah.
And every time you get to a new level of accomplishment, you look back on what you were struggling with. That's not that hard anymore. And you just
Mhm.
you just keep growing.
Yeah.
Now, do you travel outside of Maine or is it just all locally you do all your stuff?
Yeah, this has mainly been all locally. Um, I would definitely love to start traveling. It's more of like me gaining the confidence again to be like my other thing is I want it to be something like that's accessible for everyone. And I remember her saying to actually one of our old team doctors, I'm like, I just wish that like I could do this and not have to charge anyone anything. And she's like, Emily, but like that's kind of like how a business works. Like, unfortunately, like you have like if you want to
Yeah,
get this out to more people, you do have to charge
yeah,
so that you can continue to do this work. Um, which gave me good perspective, but it was one of those things that like yeah, at some point I would love to go and give talks and to, I don't know, like I'm very big on like I just don't want to speak to the kids, but I want to speak to like, right? Like I think so often they're just talked at. And I think it
yeah,
just there's this kind of thing that they just get shut down.
yeah.
And someone the other day said something about like this really good speaker. He's like, they don't just he doesn't just speak to their ears, he speaks to their souls. And I'm like,
Mm,
I like that idea of like, I don't want it to be surface level. Like I really want them to feel like something has been taken away
you
from
want to make an
this.
impact. You want to impact
Yeah.
them. What about their parents?
Right. Well,
I
and
mean,
I think
speaking
that's
to
the
them.
other thing too, is I think now more than ever, um, there's a disconnect between kids and their parents because they're not going to their parents first for questions a lot of the times. They're going to their phones and asking Google.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just the first thing that I think of and I notice that there's this disconnect. Um and then because there's this disconnect, there's a lack of relationship. And so then these kids are more reluctant for these to allow their parents to hold them accountable. And I don't know, I think it just is kind of this snowball effect, but um I mean, I would love to more so for them. I don't know how much advice I could give them in the mental space, but more so of like, okay, this is what the recruiting, like if you need help with the
Yeah.
recruiting process, this is what
Please.
I can lend you.
Yeah.
Whereas to players and coaches, it's more of the relationship and connection piece.
I mean, I'm just listening to all the stuff you're saying through this last hour and a half. See how the time flies, right? And you have the kids, the recruiting process on the kids side.
Yep.
You got the recruiting process on the parents side.
Mm-hmm.
You got the what's it like to be a freshman in college side. You got it. What's it like to not have a reason to transfer side. You have a,
Yeah.
what's it like to actually transfer and go to another school side. Then you have the other part that we didn't even talk about yet, which is going to be another time and different day is what's it like when it's over?
Yeah.
When you're not putting those sneakers on anymore. It's like it's
Mm-hmm.
over. And
Yeah.
that's when a lot of athletes suffer.
Right.
Their identity is stripped and they suffer. And there's so many topics you can talk about. It's like you have a unlimited audience, is
Yeah,
really what I'm
that's I
saying.
think that's the good and the tough part and feeling like my biggest thing is I don't want to overspeak and lead them like astray or something like that, but
Don't
I think
overthink it.
yeah, see? But I think experience when people ask, someone said the other day like, oh, what are your qualifications, and you give them your certifications. Well, I got certified in this and this. And I'm like, it's so funny because to me, I look at that and I'm like, that was a piece of paper. And even going through some of those courses, I'm like,
Yeah,
really, this is what we're learning? Whereas I'm like, my experience and
that's certification.
yeah, that is my certification, that's my degree, that's my
Yeah,
master's, my doctorate.
yeah, right,
Um, being through it and experiencing it and getting to the point where like I allowed myself to process and reflect on it,
right.
which I
And,
think is
and
rare.
Emily, I don't think, and listen, I'm in the business of designations in my world too.
Mhm.
And nobody cares about your designations. They don't care about your certifications. They
Mhm.
care about your experience. What have
Yeah.
you done? Have you walked in their shoes? Have you accomplished what you're telling them to accomplish? Are you leading by example? Do you have the core values? Do you have the discipline, the commitment to do what needs to be done? That's
Yeah.
what they're looking for. And then when they look at you and they say, holy crap, look at what she has done, not
Yeah.
what test she took.
Right, right, right.
That's intense,
Mhm.
you know? So what does the future look like? Yeah, I mean, how old are you now?
25.
Oh my God, you're so old. 25 years old. What does the future look like for you? Can you picture 5 years? I know you got your vision board in the back, but can you picture 5 years from now? Like what this is going to grow into?
I mean, hopefully it's something where it's like right now I also work as a personal trainer at a gym and working on getting another job because I like to stay busy but also for connections. And I'm hoping it gets to a point where this is like a flourishing business, to where, right? I always say like there's a lot of business that pitch themselves and they try and tell you what you need. And I don't like that. Like, right? You're always told I took a PR class and for me, it's like, okay, what makes you different? And I was like, well, what I would want for my business is we don't tell you what you need. You tell us what you need. And then we have a malleable support system that we can figure it out and we'll make things work. And it's not a cookie cutter thing of, oh, well, this is what we do for this. No, like, right. We always talk about how every person is different. Well, how can we cater to you in that same way?
Yeah.
Um, so it's hopefully to bring more people on board, bring the awareness, eventually partner with college teams And I would love to start creating modules at some point for coaches, right? Like, I'm like, all right, these coaches have modules for recruiting and all this and that, all these small, minute details for rules that they have to know, but they don't have to do a module on like student mental health or um, how to detect signs of mental illness or depression or whatever. And again, not to say that they're certified, like a certified mental health professional, but like to at least feel comfortable and confident in their abilities to sit down with a student and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I'm not
Yeah.
just asking you that to ask you that, but like, really, are you okay? How are you doing? And is there anything I can do to support you? And wait for that answer. And it might not come right away, but if you're persistent in just saying like, "Hey, I'm here for you," right? Like enough times like you knock, it's on the door, it's going to be opened. So hopefully it can kind of get into that point where it's really just a safety net.
Well, we got to change your vocabulary. Hope is not a word. It's
Okay.
you can't say hopefully it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to happen this time, this year, this month, this whatever.
Yeah.
You got to put the
True.
date in the calendar with like your vision board and say
Yep.
these are the things that are going to happen.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Well, Emily, we've talked about a lot of stuff, and now we're on an hour and 53 minutes, right? Which is like it just
Y-
goes when these topics fly, and
Yeah.
I can tell when you get into it, like this is just oozing out of you, which is awesome. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you think we should hit on before we wrap it up?
Gosh, like you said, I think we've almost hit anything and everything.
Yeah.
Um, I would say the one part that I would want to make clear to people that I really struggled with for a long time and that I'm really working on now is like don't feel like when you're going through something, when something happens, don't feel like you're a burden because right? Like one, I think you need to take that best friend advice and if your best friend was going through something, would you not want them to tell you? And I just remember going through a really hard time and I was like, okay, I knew I had hit rock bottom and that was my point of like calling my best friend and I think that was the best decision I made and she was close by and picked me up. So I just say like I think we're always so afraid of being a burden to someone else, but when we think of like humans love connection and we love to help one another whether we realize it or not, we get such a sense of joy from that is like don't cheat your friends the opportunity, don't cheat your friends, your teammates, your coaches the opportunity to be there for you. And I think
Mm,
that would be like I don't know, one of my biggest things that um funny enough I didn't say on that whole time, but um that I really want to be clear about.
well, that's awesome. I love what you said. Let others be there for you,
Yeah.
and a lot of people are stubborn.
Yeah.
Like they like no, no, I don't want to do that.
Yep.
Which is well, that's awesome. So, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so on my Instagram, EM_POWERMENT_. Um, I'm on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and then I also have um, my website, EmilyEspositoEmpowerment.com, and that has my email, stories, blogs, people to connect you with. So easily can connect there and more than happy. And same thing on TikTok and wherever else.
Yeah. And I'm gonna just tell everybody um who is listening, like you can tell you are intense. You are
Hopefully not
intense.
too intense.
Even though you're an overthinker, you're intense.
Mm,
But I read your story on your website.
hmm.
If nobody gets excited, if they don't get excited to hire you after reading that, then they don't know what they're doing.
Well,
You
I
know,
appreciate
if
that.
they need a coach to really jack people up who's been through it all, you've been through a lot.
Hmm.
And now you're taking your experience and you're going to coach others on how to overcome that or avoid that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's priceless.
I
And I
appreciate
saw
that.
your cost per hour. It's way
Hmm.
too low.
I know people have told me that once or twice. I said, I don't
Way
know.
too low. Here's how
Well,
you
I'm gonna
know.
need your help maybe on the back end with some
All right.
advice on that.
Here's some advice on that. It's
Okay.
when people start saying it's too expensive,
Hmm.
that's when you know your price is right.
Okay.
It's when people pay it without asking, man, that's expensive. That's when you know it's too low,
Okay.
you know?
That's a good point too.
Yeah. So I won't tell anybody what it is. Let them go on and look. Let them go to your
Okay.
website and check it out. But for that price, the whole world should be hiring you right now,
Mm.
you
Well,
know?
thank you.
So Emily, this has been great. Thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your life, to share your story, with those that are out there. And I know for those that are listening, especially the young athletes coming up, this is a story they need to hear.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for having me on. I think I've seen, some of the other people you have on, and to have a platform like this where people get to share what they've been through, what they're going through, and then
Yeah.
what they want to do, right? It's like, um, I don't know, it's a community that brings people together. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I wish you the best of luck. And, that vision board, it's
Mhm.
all going to come true. I know it,
Thank you.
you know? So we'll
I'll
we'll see.
stop using hopefully. I'll
Yeah,
keep
no,
that in my
no, you're
mind.
no longer allowed to use hope. It's I will.
Yep.
All right, we'll
Sounds
see you
good.
soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.